that. So, what I'm thinking, actually she seems to be behaving now, but we've gone down to 2 stars. Can somebody give me a thumbs up and make sure the signal's okay? Oh, this isn't good. We just start out there. Okay, right. Right, I'm going to just let you turn around for a second. And let's see if I can get Gimbal to... This is my favourite lamppost. Okay? It just reminds me of, you know, the Jack the Ripper tour that Natalie does. Every time I see this lamppost when it's lit, I'm like, that's a Natalie thing. Now, where we are, we're in Writer's Court. Now, if anybody comes on and says, why is it stationary or not moving, could you just let them know we're having gimbal issues? Now, I'm going to try and move slowly round. And now I've gone down to 1 star. Oh, there we go, there's 2. 1. Right, I'm going to go over here because the signal's dropping. Right, okay, I'm going to kind of stay in the middle. There, we're on green now. Right, we're fine, we'll keep going, it's good. Right, now where we are, this is... Lady Stairs close is behind us, where we've just come from. You've got Macker's Court and the Writers' Museum, and Wardrobe's Court is what we had just been looking at there at the front of us. Now, we're back in the Victorian period, and the first story I'm going to tell you tonight is actually quite a sad one. It's about a young lady that got into trouble. Now, it was dawn one morning in Writer's Court, which is kind of where we are, and a scavenger was sweeping around the main sewer. Now, his brush moved something. As he was sweeping, it moved something. But he couldn't quite make out what it was, but it was white. And in sort of the dim dawn light, he decided that he'd have a bit of a closer look. So he stooped down, and to his horror, he could see 5 tiny toes. What he was looking at was a newborn's leg, a baby's leg. Now, after composing himself, he wrapped up the infant's limb in his handkerchief and he took it to the police station. Now, this is before we had a proper sewage system in Edinburgh, so we had these sort of scavengers who would come in the morning and sweep. Sorry, I told you gimbal's not working right. Would sweep away or help move on the debris, okay? Is everything okay? Oh, is somebody having issues with... It's all okay, right, okay. Now, he went to the police station and he went in to see Detective McLeavy, and he laid his parcel on the table. And, you know how sometimes people they try to be funny when it's something really serious. And he goes, I found something this morning and you'll never guess. Which is kind of inappropriate really, but I think the man was in shock. And so the detective responded, not realising the seriousness of the case. He went, a bag of gold perhaps? Now, at that point he said, I wish it had been. The scavenger looked down at the parcel and said, it's a bairn's leg. A bairn is a child. It's a bairn's leg. Unwrapping the parcel, there was definitely, it was a newborn baby's leg. It was very small and they could tell that it was very, very young. Now, on examining it, they could see that it had been cut off, sort of cut and like pulled away from the main part of the body. Now, it appeared kind of like a hatchet had been used or something to cut the bone, and then, yeah, it hadn't cut through all the skin and whatnot, so it had been dismembered, but not by someone who basically knew what they were doing. Anyway, now the scavenger then brought McLeavy to the site of the main soil pipe where he had found the leg, and he was able to kind of pinpoint the building it came from. Now, the trouble with that is, in the old town, it was hugely overcrowded, and there was many families living in that particular building, and there was also an inn there as well. So trying to work out where and who was responsible for the baby was going to be hard. So what McCleavey did was he secreted himself out of main view of the buildings, so kind of in one of the entrances to the close. So as we come over here, I'll just show you. So you can see here you've got Wardrope's Court there, so he kind of would hid himself like that, but he could see and hear what was going on in the courtyard. It was still very early in the morning, and as he stood there, he told the scavenger just to carry on about his business as if nothing happened. So yeah, one of the houses though, actually, as he was standing there, he could hear a window being opened, very, very slowly and quietly. Now he managed to come out and see where the open window was, and that there was a very, very pale-faced girl looking out of the window, and she had a very clean white cap on. So at that point, he kind of realised, he knows that she's probably a good candidate, because she was kind of looking around and down into the close. Now they knew that the baby hadn't been thrown out of a window, that it had been down the soil pipe, but the problem is there were so many females in the area, it was going to be difficult to try and work out which one of the women it was, because this is before we had a really good forensic medicine, So I'll just see if I can let you have a look at Lady Stair's house there. So yeah, now McCleavey decided to go through every single one of the houses, and he spoke to the families to check with the mistresses if there had been any sights of their servants being with child and then not having a baby and that kind of thing. So he went through them all before he came to the last house, which was that of the pale-faced girl with the white cap. Now, strongly, he had this feeling that it was definitely, her. And the weird part is, when he actually went to the door, she was the one that opened it. She opened the door. Now he described her as being very delicate, very nervous and very pale. She looked fearful, and he was surprised at how pale she looked with this really smart white cap on her head. It just didn't seem to make sense. Yeah, there's lots of people living in the houses here. The good thing about the old town is we still have people living in the heart of the city, which is what keeps it alive. Now, after explaining his reason for being here, he asked the white-capped girl if he'd asked to speak to the master, and then when he got to see Mr. White, he asked him, has she always been that pale? Because she looked so pale and sort of frightened. And to be fair, her employer didn't really notice. He says, well, she's maybe a little bit paler than normal, but, I've not really paid much attention to her when it comes to that. So James McCleavey interviewed all the female servants except the pale-faced girl, and he was positive she was the mother. But how do you prove it? How do you prove that she's the mother? Now, it had to be done delicately. The house, the rooms, the soil pipe head showed no signs of blood or anything else, related with the process of giving birth. There was, it's not a clean process, and there was no traces to be seen. So she'd cleaned up well. So McCleavey returned to the police station, where he came up with a cunning plan. He took the baby's leg and wrapped it in brown paper, like it was a little parcel, and then he wrote the girl's name and address on it. So he then returned to Mr. White's inn, and he was surprised that it wasn't the girl that actually answered the door, it was somebody else. It was a different servant. So she showed him into a room to wait. Now, McCleavey asked to speak to Mary Brown privately. Now, employer, luckily, was a very discreet man. Mr. White was quite discreet and prudent, and he realised what was going on. So he put them in a room. Now, Mary entered the room and she was not pale anymore. She was actually quite sickly, flushed, and her lip was quivering, and she was swaying. And he describes her as he was surprised at how she managed to keep herself upright, because she looked like she was going to pass out. And she sees the detective, and she went, "You have a parcel for me, sir." She stuttered. "Where is it from?" So the detective offered the parcel to Mary, but she was, as soon as she saw it, she realised, as soon as she touched the parcel, she realised that there were, she knew what was in there. And she shrank back, and as she shrank back, the parcel dropped to the ground and fell at her feet. And she stood there motionless, transfixed on the parcel. There was nothing she could do. She was unable to move a muscle. And McCleavey was like, "Now that's no way to treat a parcel, And he said, "I insist you pick it up." And she was like, "Oh God, I can't." She cried, "I can't." And McCleavey picked up the parcel and laid it on the table. He says, come open it." And she couldn't. And she went, "I cannot, sir. Have mercy. I cannot open it." And he says, "But why so? What do you think is in it?" So he's kind of, he knows that she knows what's in it, and she knows that he knows, but they're still doing that dance. She's still not recognising what's going on. She's at that point where she's still in denial about everything. Anyway. So yeah, and so he was like that. "But why so?" And she went, "Oh, I don't know," she cried. "But I cannot open it, that dreadful thing. I cannot open that dreadful thing." Now, as Mary muttered this, she burst into tears and suppressed a scream, which would have been heard if there'd been anyone close to the door. So McCleavey went over and he actually snibbed the door. He didn't want anybody coming in. "Oh, is it still not working? All you see is black. Try refreshing or come right out of HeyGo and go back in." I'm going to go back out onto the street. I prefer to do this one in here just because it's quite a sad story and I don't want to overheard, but if there's problems I might... Oh, it's a great picture there. Okay, right. Okay. Now McCleavey went over to the door, he snibbed it like I said, and returning to the table again, he pointed at the parcel. "You must open it, or I will call your master." So he's forcing the girl to open it. So at the sight of the poor creature, she was a pitiful sight. She was shaking, she was fumbling with the string. She was so emotional. She was just. So eventually she steadied herself, fearful that he was going to call her master and her master would find out what had happened. So she kind of approached it. She's trying to get the strings untied, but her hands were shaking so much she couldn't. And at this point, McCleavey is like, pulled out a knife, and he says, "Well, I cut the string." And at that point, she steadied herself. She got busy with the string, and was she so scared of the knife because she knows what she did with it earlier in the day, or with a knife earlier in the day? We don't know, but she managed to get that parcel untied. Now Mary unfolded the paper and laid bare the contents. All her strength left her, and at the sight of the baby's leg wrapped in the paper, she passed out. She fainted to the floor, and she lay there unconscious for quite a long time. And McCleavey was a little bit worried, so he tried to revive her with some spirits, brandy or whatever it is they would use back in the day for that kind of thing. Now eventually Mary came round. "Where is it?" she cried. "You will not hang me, will you?" So at this point, he knows. She knows. Everybody. She's kind of accepted what she's done. "Say you will not hang me, and I will tell you all." Now McCleavey, he was actually honest with her, And he told Mary, I can't make any promises, but it would be better for you if you came clean. You know, if you tell me everything that's happened. So Mary was sobbing uncontrollably by this point, and she agreed to tell him the whole sorry tale. Now, Mary had been seduced by a man who left her after he got her pregnant, and she was unmarried, stung with shame, because back at this point in our history, in the 1800s, being unmarried with a child, you know, is still a very shameful thing. We still had that going on here. And she was, you know, she was pregnant. So what she did was she hid the pregnancy and the birth. Now, she claimed the child had been stillborn when she gave birth to it. And that way she was able to hide her shame because the baby had never lived. So she, in her own mind, to try and hide the fact that she'd been with child and not married, she cut the baby into pieces and put it down the soil pipe. Now, barbaric as that sounds, you have to understand the social shame that the girl would have gone through. You know, she wouldn't have been able to get employed, and her, you know, people would have shunned her and that kind of thing. So it's difficult when we look at these things with modern eyes. You've got to understand what it was like back in the day. So she's like, must I go with you to prison? Yeah, I'm going to head out now because there's lots of folk coming. So she was like, must I go to prison? Go and get your shawl and your bonnet, said the detective, and say nothing to anyone. So he was actually trying to be, you know, nice to her, because I think he understood what was going on. I am ruined, oh my poor mother. So that's what she's worried about. Her mother, how her mother is going to, you know, what her mother's going to think of her. And she's like, how will I be able to look her in the face again? Nor hold my head up again amongst, you know, decent people. That is how bad the consequences of being an unwed mother is, you know. So yeah. Now, McLeavy at this point is like, softly, you know, you must be calm. Thank you, sweetheart. And obey me, you know. Or see, and at that point he held up his handcuffs. So she's managed to muster her strength together. She braced herself, and she went and did what he told her. She got her bonnet, her shawl, and she accompanied McLeavy to the police station. He's not got her in handcuffs. They've walked to the police station together. Hop on. I know. It would be fun. I've never done it. The ghost bus, is that what you're... Yeah. Now, at the station, Mary confessed again. She never deviated from the story. Now, she was tried in the High Court and was found... And because all they had was the leg of the baby, there wasn't any evidence to show that the child had ever breathed, because the chest was missing. And because of that, she was actually found guilty of a lesser charge, which was concealment. So concealment of pregnancy, concealment of the body, and was sentenced to 9 months in prison. So, I mean, when I read the story, I was like, it's actually a really good outcome for her, even though she's been to prison for 9 months and her reputation's damaged and things. It doesn't sound the way that he's written it, because the detective took down really good notes at the time and then wrote his books afterwards, that she didn't seem like a person that would have done it. Yeah, back in the day we had concealment of pregnancy and child murder. If you didn't tell anyone you were pregnant, it was assumed you wanted the child to die. Yes, if you didn't have anyone at the birth, it was also assumed you wanted the child to die, which, you know, isn't great. I mean, I've had 5 kids, and, you know, once you get to number 4, they come out like rockets. So the chances of getting anywhere on time and letting people know are slim. Anyway, enough about me. Right, so I'm going to move on to another murder, but it's further back in time. We're into the 1600s. Now, I do tell this story on one of my other tours, but I tell it from a different perspective. So we're going to talk about George Lockhart. No, we'll never know if the child lived, breathed, And to be honest, the girl was so naive, from what I can gather, that I don't think she... I like to hope the baby was stillborn and blue. But I think when she's given birth, she wouldn't have known how to, help a baby take its first breath if there was a problem. Do you know what I mean? Because back in the day, I'm just going to flip over for a second. Where I used to live, I had a neighbour who was in her 70s, and that was like 20 years ago, so she would be in her 90s now. And she got herself into trouble and was obviously became pregnant. It was a one-off, unfortunately. It was just this one mistake. Anyway, she got pregnant, eventually told her mother, who then told her to tell no one, and that when the baby was born, she would take the child as hers and say she'd given birth to the baby. This is only 90 years ago, right? Now, my neighbour, the lady in question, she went into labour and no one had told her how the baby comes out. Right? She had no idea what was about to happen to her body. And that's how naive people were. Nobody spoke about these things, and you were almost punished for being pregnant without a child. So, if you're very, very naive, the chances are you're in for one massive shock. If you don't, it's different if you have lots of siblings, because at some point you'll have seen your mother give birth or been there present roundabout, you know what I mean? So, so she, it wasn't until she died, I think she was about 50, 60 before her daughter, who had been brought up as her sister, found out that she was actually her mother, which is just heartbreaking because the daughter never forgave her, and it's like there's nothing to forgive. It's just crazy. But what do you do? Anyway, now, sorry, just ignoring those men. I'm going to turn you round. Right, we got off sidetrack there. Okay, so where the Bank of Scotland is, the red phone box and things, that is where Sir George Lockhart lived. Now, I do tell the story of his murder on a different tour, but I want to focus on him rather than the perpetrator. Now, George Lockhart was... he was actually knighted by Charles II in 1663. Oh, fire engine. Now, his legal skills were the finest in the country, and Lockhart was a charming man whose oratory skills were rarely found, failed to draw admiration from all quarters, so even the people on the other side of whatever was going on, Oh, I didn't know that. I need to look that up, Penny. So in 1672 he became Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, and unusually for Lockhart, the court decided a case against his client. He usually won his cases, and he requested an appeal to Parliament. Now the judges decided that this was disrespectful and illegal, as did the government, and this resulted in Lockhart being disbarred, right? Now this is just to show you what the man was like. Now, as an act of huge respect for the man, George Lockhart, 50 advocates cast off their gowns and wigs and withdrew from their legal career. So if you've got 50 of the top lawyers in the country. Now, if anyone's just joined us, my gimbal has got a little problem at the moment, so it's doing that wobbly thing. So please don't give me a negative review on it. It's a technical problem, and hopefully I'll try and get it fixed for the next time. So they were banished from Edinburgh as a result of them withdrawing, and as a result suspended from all legal business in the country, was suspended for about 12 months. Because there was no one to do the job. Now, only the intervention of Sir George Mackenzie enabled the return of these advocates. So George Mackenzie, you may well have heard the Bloody Mackenzie story if you've been in Greyfriars with Paul. Now, anyway, so yes, so George Lockhart defended the Covenanters and a man accused of shooting the Archbishop. He even acted as counsel for the Earl of Athol in his trial, for high treason in 1681, and he was made Lord President of the Court of Session 4 years later. So he had reached the top of his legal career. Now, his legal brilliance did not protect him from a tragic end. On Sunday the 31st of March 1689, in Old Bank Close, which stood just where the scaffolding is over there, he was murdered. He was shot in the back by a man called John Cheesley. Now, he had sat on the trial, or the divorce rather, of John Cheesley, and found in favour of his wife and 10/11 children. John Cheesley was of Dalry, and he pulled the trigger. Now, Cheesley was known for his violence, and the trial of Cheesley, his divorce, the President had actually given, George Lockhart had given his wife £93 per annum, which was equivalent to about £80,000 today. So it went very badly. Now, Lockhart was shot on his doorstep, and his poor wife tried to drag him into the house to save him, but obviously he didn't survive. Cheesley was found guilty, where he was executed in Edinburgh. So it was an absolutely pointless murder, to be fair. Now, where we're looking, this is where there's the wobble. This is where the toll booth in Edinburgh was. So this is where the main prison in the city was. And people would be executed on a platform just in front of us where the building stood. And it was I think it was up to about 5 stories at the back. So it was a really awful place, and it's we've lost it because when they're trying to prove the city, they get rid of these things. Now, the toll booth is also the scene of a storming, shall we say? Yeah, we're going to talk about a man called Captain John Porteous, and he was not a very popular character in Edinburgh. He was full of his own self-importance. He was born in 1695, and is primarily remembered for his hanging due to a riot. Now, he was a native of Traquair, which is down in the borders. His family established a tailor's business in the Canongate, and John returned to Edinburgh after military service in 1716, becoming the drill master of the City Guard. So the City Guard is like the pre-runner to the police, before we had the police. Now, he seemed to have been made... He was one of these, he was very arrogant, full of his own importance. He was officious, and he was widely disliked across the city by members of the City Guard and members of the public, to be fair. Now, he also was a keen golfer, so this just shows you people always have more than one story to them. He was a keen golfer, and he had the first golf match ever reported in a newspaper in 1724. He lost, but yes, if you're into golf history, there's one for you. So there's somebody playing a fiddle. The building I was just showing you, this building is the High Court of Justiciary. So this is criminal cases, the highest court in the land. Sorry about the wobble, everyone. Now, in early 1736, the trial of Andrew Wilson, George Robertson and William Hall took place. I'm just going to start walking down now. Now, the charge was smuggling and attempted robbery. Now, Hall was sentenced to transportation. However, Andrew Wilson was sentenced to hang, as was George Robertson. They were held in the toll booth, which is just where we've come from, awaiting for the death sentence to be carried out. Now, Robertson actually escaped, and he made it all the way to Holland after friends burnt the bars of his window cell. It's like something you would see in a movie, Anyway, but on the 14th of April 1736, Andrew Wilson was hanged in the Grassmarket. Now, rumours had spread that Porteous had actually tortured the prisoner, and the mob were already on the side of Wilson. So the fact that they had this going on, the Edinburgh City mob was convinced that Captain Porteous had tortured the prisoner before he was executed, but also that he had done other things as well to other prisoners. So when Wilson's body was cut down, a riot ensued. Now, the Lord Provost instructed Porteous to call out the entire city guard. Okay, so he called out the city guard. The mob actually stoned the city guard, the executioner, and all this kind of thing. So there was a lot going on. Now, eventually the mob dissipated. The town guard was given the order by Porteous to fire over the crowd's head, and this was trying to, break up the riot. Now, it only kind of inflamed the situation. The mob got even more revved up about what was going on, and then a number of people living in the tall tenements surrounding the grass market were actually wounded by the town guard because they'd shot up the way. So people that were hanging out their windows to have a look to see what was going on were hit by these stray bullets. So although they were trying not to hit people by pointing the guns up the way, sorry, that's that wobble again, they actually, wounded people. So Porteous then gave the orders to fire into the crowd. So at this point they've stopped trying to avoid them and they're firing into the crowd. 6 people were killed and 20 were wounded. Porteous then was charged with murder the same afternoon. His trial was on the 5th of July 1736. Many witnesses reported seeing him fire his pistol into the crowd, whilst many reported him not drawing his weapon. So there were some people that said he did and there were people that said he didn't. Anyway, the jury found him unanimously guilty, possibly influenced by the mob gathering outside. So the Edinburgh mob were gathered outside the court, which would have been, frightening for the people on the jury, because they would then get released into the public, so if it had gone the other way. Now, he was sentenced to hang on the 8th of September 1736. Due to pressure from London, however, the Prime Minister arranged a royal pardon for Porteous. So he was actually given a royal pardon. Now, the Edinburgh mob were already worked up about things, so you can imagine that went down like a lead balloon. Basically, it's to do with excise duty. They needed these taxes to be collected, and Porteous was very good at it. Smuggling was one of the things that the prisoners had been charged with, so avoiding paying excise duties. So the government were trying to make a statement. Now, the news created outrage in Edinburgh, and on the 7th of September 1736, the mob of around 4,000 people by this point, armed with weapons, taken from the town guard, they actually took the weapons off the town guard, broke into the toll booth where Porteous had been held prisoner and dragged him to the grass market, and there he was lynched. So they had broken into Cressers, taken a length of rope to do the job. Now, Cressers, that's all it ever sold, brushes and rope. But they didn't steal it. They actually placed payment on the counter for the rope. Then they got a dyer's pole and made a makeshift gallows and hung Porteous in the grass market. Now, the authorities in London offered a considerable bounty of, what was it now? £200 it was £200 for information about the ringleaders. But despite this, and bearing in mind there was 4,000 people, nobody came forward with any information. Eventually it was actually, they raised that, but the town guard was actually fined £20,000 for not controlling the riot. So that's Captain John Porteous. Actually, I'm going to show you this because I always love this archway. I'll show you it from here. Now, where we are, this is the city chambers, just in here, and underneath here you have the real The gimbal's trembling with fear. I know, I am so sorry. I'm trying to walk slowly and smoothly, but it's just one of those things. I just love these arches. So we have this little memorial just in front of us here. So that's our war memorial, one of our war memorials. But just come in and let you. How's that? It's a nice picture, isn't it? Right. Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry about the gimbal. Now, you may have heard this one already, but we're talking about Alison Ruff. She lived from around 1480 to the 3rd of September 1535. She was an Edinburgh property owner and businesswoman who was executed for murder. She was born and bred in Edinburgh, and apparently from a well-off family. In about 1505, she married a merchant and lawyer called Jasper Main. Now, sadly, like many others, he died at the Battle of Flodden in 1513. Now, Alison Ruff took over the businesses her husband had left and his interests, which included a large number of properties in Edinburgh's Old Town. So her husband luckily had, shown her the way to run the businesses and things, and she had managed to grow them. Now, in 1514, Alison married Thomas Lauriston. The gimbal. Thomas Lauriston. Now, that one ended in divorce, and I've not been able to really find out why in 1517. Anyway, in 1531, Alison's daughter Catherine married Alexander Cant, who was a rich burgess of Edinburgh. Now, Alison moved in with her daughter and son-in-law in their new home. Now, this shows you the ambition of Alison. She wanted to improve her standing in society. So she moved in. Now, in 1533, Alison was sued by an Edinburgh merchant who claimed that she had sold a property, that she had given a property away as part of the dowry for her daughter Catherine's marriage, but the property wasn't hers, it was his. So he sued her, as did Catherine's husband. He wanted his dowry. So the case found in favour of the merchant and the husband, and that... Oh, hello. Excuse me a moment. It's not even a particularly scary story, and Gimbal's gone off on a wander. Right, I'm really sorry. Keep your eyes shut while I try and straighten Gimbal up. Oh, this is so weird. I have no idea. And I've not dropped it, so... Oh, it's okay, don't worry. Gimbal has a little bit of a judder going on that I can't fix. So it's the ghosts. I know they're going to usually do ghost stories. Why are you doing murder? Anyway, so Alison was arrested, as was her daughter. Now, Alison was executed in September that year. She was drowned. But her daughter managed to escape. She pleaded the belly. Now, if you plead the belly, you're pregnant, and that means you cannot be executed whilst you're pregnant. So that gave her time to breathe, and then she escaped, and eventually I think she made it all the way to Germany. Now, whilst we're on the subject of murders, there is a close to it we're just passing here, which is called... Excuse me. Oh, sorry, I think I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Okay, so this is Bell's Wynd. I'll just let you have a little look. Now, Bell's Wynd, just down here, there was a house that belonged to a merchant called Mr. Guthrie, and he lived here with his wife. And it was a strange story because they disappeared one day. Everyone just assumed that they had moved to the country. People didn't realise that Mr. Guthrie had come home early from a business trip and found his wife entertaining a male friend, a male companion. She'd laid the table for dinner and they were all ready to eat when Mr. Guthrie came in. And Mr. Guthrie was so angry that he actually murdered both of them, and he placed them in the bed and then locked the door of the bedroom, locked the door of the house, and left and never went back. The bodies, it took about 20 years before the bodies were actually discovered. And they were only discovered because there was a locksmith who knew that that flat was bigger than his, and he actually wanted to see if he could take it over. And he discovered, it must have been quite a shocking sight when you think about it. The table was laid for dinner, so there was food on the table that had been there for 20 years. Thick layer of dust. It's a bit like the Mrs. Havisham story, you know. She's still in her wedding dress, that kind of thing. So it must have been quite a shock. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the other side. The next story I'm going to tell you is about North Grays Close, but I need to be on this side of the street so I can show you the building. That makes much more sense. Right, we're just going to get across the road here. Just wait for the green man. Gimbal's still behaving, so that's good. I'm not going to make it. I don't want to try run in case the gimbal goes off again. Right, sorry about this. There we are. Right, okay, so we're in the old town, and just ahead of us we've got, we're on the High Street section. Just going to wait for the 35 to go by, and at some point we'll be able to get across the road. Yes, it is. I'm doing ghost stories tomorrow, actually. I mean, there's been people living here since the Bronze Age, so you can understand why there's lots of strange goings on. Everyone that's just joining, we're just about at the end. I've got one more story for you. My gimbal has a bit of a judder on it. It's having a bit of an issue to itself today. But yeah, tomorrow night and the night after I've got other tours on, so if you fancy gruesome and dark, then we'll have another go at that, and hopefully the gimbal will have gotten over itself by then. Right, so we're talking about North Grays Close, which is just past this bus. Right, I'm just going to get past the bus and show you. William and Grace Newell were a middle-aged couple, and oopsie daisy, there we go, and they lived in number 2 North Grays Close. In fact, what I'll do, because that's actually, I'm going to go over here out the way, then we'll look up at it. That's probably better. That's what it's like. It's like the gimbal's on a caffeine buzz that's gone wrong. Quite possibly too much caffeine as well. Nicotine and caffeine, there you go. Sugar buzz. So you can see these buildings here. North Grays. Are you alright, sweetie?
Yeah, of course. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Ooh, for the love of Fox's glass hair mints. Yeah. Right, where was I? Okay, yeah. So, William and Grace Newell. Now, they lived in number 2. So, where you can see that grey car, there's just a little opening. Yeah, just there, that's North Grays Close. And they lived in the attic space right at the top there. Now, William worked as a painter on and off, and both of them had a really good liking for the drink. They were very, very fond drinkers. Now, on the 14th of October 1911, the pair had been hitting the drink quite hard, but William decided to go home. But he had to be helped up the stairs by his stepson Patrick, because he was just too drunk to make it all the way to the top up here. So Patrick Horn and his sister Christina Glancy had helped him up the stairs. They actually lived next door to them. Now, Grace finally decided to go home, but had to be helped as well to the attic room, and she got home about 10 p.m. So both of them have had a skinful. They're both very, very drunk. I do some, yes. I usually do them as live because the buildings are so thick it's really hard to get a signal. So I do recordings and then we'll do them elsewhere. Now, Grace Newell, basically they'd taken her upstairs. Grace finally decided to go home. Now, shortly after she was home, there was an outcry from the high street where we're standing. Somebody shouted, "There's a woman over the window. So there's a woman hanging out of the window. So this scream had arisen from the high street. Somebody had been looking up and seen it. Now Grace Newell was hanging onto the window the best she could. She's hanging on with dear life, and then she shouted, "They are flinging me over the window." So she's cried that they're flinging me over the window, and then she shouted, "Murder, please help." So at this point, she's convinced she's about to die, and there was lots of witnesses to this. Now, a silent and sinister man could be seen moving around in the room, which I find quite odd, because if it's an attic space, it depends, I suppose, if the witnesses are also upstairs on this side, maybe. Anyway, this silent and sinister man was seen moving around in the room. Now, moments later, Grace came crashing down onto the cobbles. Basically, she landed in the street here, in the high street, and she died instantly. So she died as soon as she hit the ground. Now, there was no one else in the room except her husband. He was taken into custody, and he was tried at the High Court on the 15th of January 1912. He tried to make out that it wasn't him that had done it. The first witness at the trial said it was the sister Christina, and she rushed into the room, and he said to her, "Well, Tina, I never done it. I don't know what was wrong." So he's going, "It wasn't me. I didn't do it." He doesn't know what's happened. A week earlier, though, Grace had threatened to commit suicide. Now, there was a lady called Janet who lived in the flat below them, and she said that they had been singing and dancing earlier that night, and just after 10 she heard the sound of a body being dragged along the floor above her, and the cry, "Murder." Now, her daughter also heard the sounds of heavy dragging. So we're not sure, if she's been dragged across the floor, it doesn't make, how was she able to shout and hold on to the window? So there's all sorts of kind of questions going on with what happened. So there was also Jenny Sutherland had also seen Grace hanging onto the window for her dear life, and she got the impression that she had been forcibly ejected out of the window. So that was kind of her statement, that she had been pushed out the window. And many witnesses saw and heard the cries. Now, Barbara Aitchison, the sister of the murdered woman, she actually said that they had been married for 17 years. They didn't have any children. William would regularly beat his wife if they'd been drinking. Now, a former neighbour of the Newells actually testified that William would bring up strange men and leave them with his wife for immoral purposes. So her husband was making her sleep with men for money. So he was prostituting his wife. So that was also came out at the trial, which is just awful. Now, John Bell found William fully dressed when he'd got into the room, Constable John Bell, fully dressed, and he told him they had been arguing over money, and she had threatened to jump out the window. Now, he told her to get on with it then, and in a moment she was gone. So he's told the police that she was suicidal and that she threw herself out the window. Now, strangely, the Solicitor General prosecuting said he wasn't preparing to accept a plea of assault, that he was preparing to accept a plea for assault, and William Newell pled guilty to assault and rather than murder, and his punishment was 2 months in prison. Yeah, I know, I was like, what does a body being dragged across the floor sound like? But you know, I mean, he would have had to have, you know, kept her mouth covered so she couldn't scream or whatever when he was doing it. But how can you go from murder, like you throw your wife out of a window, or you don't help her when she's hanging out the window, you know, and you get 2 months in prison? Absolutely bizarre. But that's, you know, back in the day, there's not enough evidence, or, you know, anyway. So there we are. Yeah, it would depend on the floor. It would have just been, at this point in time, most likely your floorboard is actually the ceiling of the room below. So it's like this much wood between you and your neighbours downstairs. So not the greatest kind of soundproofing in these buildings. Now, yeah, I'm going to leave it on that one. Finished. Woohoo! Finished on time, what can I say, people? There's a lot more stories out there, but those are just some of the ones that are just in this area, so I thought I would let you hear some of them. Now, if you have any questions, you better well ask me. Thanks everyone that's following me, I really appreciate it. I know some people have tipped already, so thank you for that. And I think I saw 2 or 3 of my sponsors on tonight. You think they'll be sick of my voice by now? But anyway, yeah. Well, you see, that's what always amazes me about things. It's like you have all these stories that are made up by Hollywood and whatnot, and you're just like, read history, it's all there. And it's like they did the Mary Queen of Scots movie, and they made loads of stuff up, and I'm like, no, her life was so full, there was no need. It's just bizarre, but anyway. So tomorrow, yeah, definitely. I think I'm doing the ghosts tomorrow, so it'll be all ghost stories. Thank you. Anyway, right, I'm just walking down to where my husband's meeting me, so I'm just going to keep you on till I get there, if that's all right. Thank you. Yeah. No, there's what we'd like to do is I'd like to do a video at night going down some of the closes, and then do an as live, because it saves that loss of signal, but it also means we can move around and see more, and you get the idea of how things, I mean, like this one here, if I talk about this one on the Darker Side Part 2, this is Tweeddale Close, and a murder took place just here, and I'd love to go in and be able to show you it, but the signal just is so bad, it just disappears, and so sometimes an as live might be a better option. Do you ever do a 48 hours in Edinburgh tour? What, live or on stream, do you mean? It's just I've got the kids, so I can't. So he drops me off and then he picks me up, and we just hope that everything is hunky-dory. 9 times out of 10 it is. I mean, generally speaking, it's fine. I have done them in the past. Yeah, I've done. I did it on a different platform, where we talked about how to get the most out of Edinburgh in 48 hours. Yeah, because I did but I do travel planning in Scotland. I've got a tour or a show for that, and I'm going to start theming it so that, you know, it'll be different subjects each time, but people can still ask questions about other things. But yeah, definitely, because a lot of people, it's sometimes easier to talk to a local than because sometimes your travel agent doesn't always know. Yes, it would. Edinburgh and Inverness, definitely. If you're following me, when I put one on, it'll come up, you'll get a little message. But if not, if you don't want to follow me, it's fine. Just go onto my profile, and there's I think a little bell icon next to each tour, and you just click that and you get an email when it's listed again. So I'll be putting some of them on in the next few days anyway, because I thought I had stuff scheduled for March and I realised I haven't. Anyway, right. We've in the Old Town, I think there's like 5 historic ones within the World Heritage Site, and I have got tours for each of them. I've put on Greyfriars, I've done the Dean Village one at the Dean Cemetery, but there's also St Cuthbert's that I'm going to do, the Canongate, and you've got 2 up on Waterloo Place, the old Carlton Burial Ground, and then further along there's the new Carlton Burial Ground, so I'll be doing that as well. Okay, right. Yeah, I do Outlander tours. I'm going to put that one on because a lot of people have been asking about it lately. So it's a walking tour that'll do the Edinburgh locations. When I do Bewley, come and watch that. It's a novel location. I've done Blackness Castle as an As Live, which is also an Outlander location. So there's lots of ones that I'm going to be doing. So yes, right. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. I will hopefully see some of you tomorrow. Okay? Right, thank you. What's my favourite tour to do? Oh, it changes all the time. It just depends what mood I'm in. It really does. Yeah, it depends on what mood I'm in and what the weather's doing. Yeah, I think the day I stop having, like, I stop having the feeling that everything's great. The first, when I do it, no matter how many times I've done a tour, there's always something different about it. And when that stops, I'm going to be in trouble. Anyway, right, I will see you later. No boats, no. And the worst bit is I live on an island, so I have to go on boats. But yeah, it's the first time I've ever thrown up on a Loch Ness tour. It shouldn't have gone out, and I was airborne. Like, I was in the seat, and then we hit this wave, and the boat went up, and I went up. Like, I was off the seat, and so was everybody else. I mean, it should never have gone out, but, ka-ching, money. Yeah, they went through a lot of sick bags on that trip. Anyway, too much information. I'll see you all later. Thank you. Bye.